Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final day of Summit. We're here for the session, Nutrition and Quality of Life. This is a topic that we get a lot of questions on, so I'm so happy that we have Emilie Klemptner with us today. My name is Kate Gates. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Programs with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. Emilie Klemptner has worked as a dietitian for the past 12 years in various areas, including gastrointestinal and liver transplant services, diabetes, employee wellness, and weight management. She currently works as an outpatient dietitian at Michigan Medicine for the pulmonary and lung transplant departments. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to put them in the box. We'll have time at the end to answer questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emilie now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the presentation. Today, I will be talking about nutrition and interstitial lung disease. My name is Emilie Klemptner, and I am a dietitian in the pulmonary department at Michigan Medicine. So we're going to be talking about how a healthy diet can help you feel better, essentially. One of the things a healthy diet can do is help you maintain a healthy weight. If you're overweight, that can put extra pressure on your lungs and make it harder to breathe. On the other side of things, if you're underweight, that can lead to weakening of the muscles that are involved in breathing. So really trying to eat in a way that helps you achieve and maintain a weight that's in a healthy range for you can definitely help breathing. Eating a healthy diet can also help keep your energy levels up. If we eat at regular intervals throughout the day, with the right combination of food groups and macronutrients, we can have better energy levels. Good nutrition can help you feel your best. And that's really what we're going to be talking about is, how to control some of the symptoms that you may be experiencing from your disease, as well as from your medications, and how good nutrition can really support your best quality of life. And good nutrition can also help strengthen your immune system, which of course is very important, especially at times like these. So you may say, well, what is a healthy diet? This diagram highlights some things that we are going to aim to eat more of. Those are in the green, and those that we're going to try to limit or avoid, and those are in the red. Top center there, we're going to start with eating a variety of fruits and vegetables. You may have heard before, eat the rainbow, not talking about Skittles here, but eating a wide variety of different brightly colored fruits and vegetables. That ensures that you get a good array of different nutrients from those foods. Brightly red, orange, yellow, green, purple, blue, they all have different nutrients that can support your health. The next one over is whole grains. When we talk about carbohydrates, there are some that are very processed and refined, and those can lead to energy slumps during the day, high blood sugar, don't necessarily provide good nutrition. What we're really talking about here are the whole grains, those complex carbohydrates that not only have more nutrients in them, but have more fiber. And fiber can definitely help in a lot of different ways. We'll talk about that in a few slides, but good for, of course, your GI system, but also helping you feel full and satisfied from your meals and giving good blood sugar stability. Whole grains would be things that are more like the whole wheat versions of bread products, brown rice versus white rice, getting even some, quinoa in there, things like that. The next one down is low fat or fat-free dairy products. Dairy products can provide a lot of really good calcium, which is important for our bones. If you don't tolerate lactose in the dairy products, they have lactose-free milk, or even if perhaps dairy products make you cough more or have more mucus, they do have non-dairy alternatives such as almond milk and soy milk. So you can definitely get that food group in as well. And the reason we say low fat or fat free is because traditional dairy products tend to have more saturated fat in them, which isn't as heart healthy. So if you get the reduced fat version, it'll be better for you. The next one down that we do want to try to include in our diet is adequate protein. We can get protein from plant-based foods such as nuts and legumes, and also from lean meats. And then over in the red hexagons, which I guess look kind of like little stop signs, we want to try to limit the amount of salt and added sugar that are in our diet. We'll get into more detail on those in a little bit. And we also want to try to avoid trans fats, which tend to be in fried foods and hydrogenated baked goods, because those raise our bad cholesterol and decrease our good cholesterol. And we also want to try to limit saturated fats because those aren't heart healthy as well, and those tend to be more in animal products. This diagram here is showing the MyPlate food model. It is what our government came out with to replace that traditional food guide pyramid that you might recall. What it's really getting at here, and it's trying to be more relatable, is it's showing you a dinner plate. And it has the dinner plate divided into 4 equal quadrants. And that's showing that the ratio of those food groups should be approximately equal. So instead of, our protein portion taking up half of our plate, it's saying really to get adequate protein at that meal, it only needs to take up about a quarter of our plate. Traditionally, they say it's about the size of a deck of cards, which is 3 ounces. And then similarly, our carbohydrate portion or our grain portion is only a side dish, sort of quarter of the plate as well. So that could be your potato or your rice, your pasta, your grain. And then on the other side of your plate, half of your plate ideally would be taken up by produce, fruits and vegetables. And that's how we get good fiber in our diet. Fruits and vegetables also help us feel full longer and stay satisfied. So really this combination of different macronutrients, this combination of food groups really has the best overall outcome for helping you feel good after a meal, as well as, really supporting your best health. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but essentially what it's doing is it's showing you how to mix and match to combine your different food groups to make that healthy plate model. So in the left column there, they've got some examples of lean proteins, and again, recommending about a 3-ounce portion, that deck of cards, which is approximately 21 grams of protein, which is a good amount of protein for a meal. Any more than that, you really can't absorb and utilize at one time. So having about that portion really is how you can maximize your protein intake at that meal. So some options for your lean protein: be fish, sirloin, tuna, cottage cheese, chicken, pork. There's some turkey on there. There's egg product or eggs. Each egg is about 1 ounce of protein. So 2 to 3 eggs would be your protein portion at a meal. And then do like ground beef or ground turkey. The middle column gives examples of grains or starchy vegetables, again, for a quarter of your plate. The portion they've listed there is about 15 grams of carbohydrate, and this can vary a little bit depending upon, your overall goals here. But usually about a half cup to a cup is considered a pretty good and healthy portion for a grain or starchy vegetable. So some options could be potato, cornbread, whole wheat crackers, garbanzo beans, black beans would go in there as well, brown rice. Corn is a starchy vegetable, so it does count as your carbohydrate. There's also peas, whole wheat English muffin, or bread. And then you get over to the right column there on the slide, and that is the non-starchy vegetables. And especially if you're trying to lose weight, filling half of your plate with non-starchy vegetables helps you really feel full and satisfied and less calories. And some examples that they give there are asparagus, green beans, bell peppers, salad, snap peas, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, etc. So if you're looking for some ideas about, what you could use for your meals, this slide has a nice sort of mix and match setup there. And then this slide demonstrates the protein content of some vegetarian protein sources. The first slide didn't really get into a lot of vegetarian options, so I did want to share that because eating plant-based can be a very healthy way to eat and provide adequate protein as well. So we've got soybeans, lentils, hummus, eggs we did talk about, almonds, peanut butter, quinoa, some different vegetarian protein like seitan, cottage cheese and tofu. Then there's chia seeds, chickpeas, cottage cheese, black beans, and dairy. And then, of course, we can't talk about healthy nutrition without talking about the importance of staying hydrated. Our bodies are mostly made up out of water. If we don't have enough water in our body, we don't function very well. It helps us absorb our nutrients. It helps carry oxygen and nutrients to our cells, and it helps remove waste and toxins out of the body. They say that if you feel thirsty, you're already probably a little bit dehydrated. So definitely good to keep up on that water intake. Water is your best choice, of course. And the amount of water that you should drink varies depending upon the person, but usually it's in the 6 to 8 cups per day range as a starting point. So now that we've talked about what good nutrition looks like, let's talk about some of those barriers that might be encountered when we're trying to achieve that good nutrition. Probably one of the number one things that I talk to a lot of people about are some of the GI side effects that they experience from their medications, especially Ofev and Esbriet. Some of those symptoms might include nausea, diarrhea, upset stomach, reflux, and decreased appetite. So we're going to talk about those in more detail on the next slide. Also, shortness of breath can make it much harder to procure and prepare food as well as eat it. And the increased work of breathing that you may experience increases how many calories that you burn at rest. So sometimes when you're having some of those side effects to medications, you're not feeling very hungry, maybe you feel nauseated, so you don't feel like eating very much. And then on top of that, your body is working so hard to breathe that you're burning so many calories that you actually need to eat more than you normally would. It can be really hard to keep up with that. And then fatigue can definitely not only, make it more difficult to get those healthy foods on the table and into our bodies, but it can also, just take away some of that drive for making changes as well. We're going to talk about some tips on how to get around some of these barriers. The first one we're going to talk about is nausea. One of the first things that I always like to double check is to make sure that people are taking their medication with food, especially making sure to have the different macronutrients represented. Protein in particular seems to be really helpful for moderating some of these side effects from the medication. So making sure you have a good at least 10, if not 15 or 20 grams of protein when you take your medication can be really helpful in dissipating the nausea. Ideally, you would also have it with some grain or complex carbohydrate as well as some fiber from a fruit or a vegetable. If you're feeling nauseated, that can make it difficult to get enough nutrition in. Trying to eat smaller amounts, but more frequently during the day can make that a lot more approachable. And, if you're not feeling up to eating a small amount, gives your body a chance to have some nutrition at that time, but knowing again that you'll get a little bit more in just in a couple hours so that you can kind of try to keep your energy levels up, and when you have something in your stomach, sometimes that helps moderate the nausea as well. On the other hand of things, sometimes really high fat or fried foods can make nausea worse. Fat's kind of hard to digest, but it also sits in your stomach longer. So that can be really uncomfortable to have that kind of like heavy feeling in your stomach. And it can certainly make nausea worse, as well as sometimes really sugary or really spicy foods can make things worse. So maybe sticking with things that are a little bit more bland, as well as foods that are cold or room temperature seem to be more acceptable sometimes when nausea is a problem. The other part of colder room temperature foods is they tend to have less of an aroma, and sometimes having a strong smell or aroma can make nausea worse as well. So another reason to maybe try those cooler temperature foods. Um, and if the smell of food is bothering you, if possible, maybe seeing if someone else can prepare it or cook it, so that you don't have to be right on top of that smell, or even maybe in a different room. And some possible good food choices that might sit well in your stomach when you're feeling nauseated include broth, juice, chicken without the skin, 'cause the fat's mostly in the skin, kind of starchy, bland things like pasta, rice, and oatmeal, and toast, and potatoes, um, bananas, canned fruit, jello, popsicles, sherbet, and yogurt. And there are others, that could be, but those are just some examples of foods that might sit a little bit better in your stomach when you're feeling nauseated. And then we come to probably the number one side effect that I tend to talk with people about, and that's diarrhea. Again, making sure to take your medication with protein and, ideally some of the other food groups represented will help dissipate some of these symptoms. Sometimes people even start eating, take the medication halfway through, and then finish eating to kind of sandwich the pill in between their meal. When you are experiencing diarrhea, one of the first things that I usually suggest is trying the BRAT diet, and that stands for banana, rice, applesauce, and toast. Probably a lot of you have heard of that. But those foods not only tend to be very gentle on the stomach, but they're a little bit easier to digest, and they can actually help thicken things a little bit so that you don't have as much watery output. Um, Similarly to nausea, trying smaller but more frequent meals and snacks can also be helpful. Not only is it less of a load for your digestive system to handle all at once, but it also gives your body more opportunities to absorb nutrition throughout the day. So when you're having diarrhea, the food that you're eating is moving through your digestive system much faster than usual. So your body doesn't have as much time to absorb the nutrients from what you're eating. So if you eat a little bit more often, then your body will have more chances to absorb some nutrition throughout the day. Um, One of the other things that can help you digest and tolerate your food is to try to cook things in a nice tender manner. If you think about something like a steak, it's really fibrous, right? But compare that to something like a pot roast that you cook in a slow cooker, and the meat just kind of falls apart. And that slow, moist cooking method really does a lot to break those fibers down so that it's much easier to digest and absorb as it moves through your system. Um, Similar to that, vegetables, when you cook them, the fibers in the vegetables get a lot softer, so it's easier to digest and absorb, which can help with diarrhea. And then we're going to talk about the different types of fiber because you might want to consider limiting insoluble fiber when you're having diarrhea, but increasing soluble fiber. And the difference really is how that fiber reacts to water. So insoluble fiber doesn't gel, doesn't absorb water. It just sort of accelerates the speed with which food moves through your digestive system, which isn't what we want in this case. Whereas soluble fiber does gel with water, it absorbs water. So as you can imagine, with diarrhea, there's a lot of free water in there. and the soluble fiber can kind of absorb that and thicken things up, and that'll slow the transit through your system as well. So to talk about the difference of these fibers, we're going to look at this diagram of an apple. Insoluble fiber, that really is like the skins, the peels, the seeds, the stems, all those kind of rough bits that you might see come out the other end whole. And that's really a sign that those things are going through very quickly and not digesting. Whereas the soluble fiber tends to be the inside of like fruits and vegetables. And that's going to be what you want more of. So, if you're eating an apple, for example, maybe you want to peel it, or maybe you want to cook it a little bit into more like a baked apple or an applesauce, because that's going to be easier on your body. Another example of soluble fiber would be like oatmeal. You start out with those oats and you add the water, and as you let them sit and even heating them up, the oats really gel and absorb that water. It really thickens things up, so incorporates the water in it. So as you can see, that soluble fiber could be quite helpful. Other potentially good choices when you're having diarrhea could include things that are kind of starchy and salty, because you can lose a lot of electrolytes when you're having diarrhea. So like crackers, pretzels, make sure you stay hydrated because you're losing more fluids than normal. Things that could potentially make diarrhea worse include alcohol, caffeine, and spicy foods. That can be kind of irritating for the GI system, as well as those insoluble fiber foods. Some sugar-free foods have compounds in them that are sugar alcohols, and that can sometimes make diarrhea worse, as well as sometimes we have some lactose intolerance that we develop. So sometimes taking lactose out of the diet temporarily could potentially help with diarrhea, as well as avoiding concentrated sweets, such as juice, for example. I mean, there's a reason that, we give juice to babies sometimes when they're constipated, that concentrated sugar in your GI lumen, it can really pull a lot of water in there. And the more water you pull in, the faster things are going to go through. So if you are going to drink juice, you might want to consider diluting it with some water, because that won't make the diarrhea as worse if it's diluted. And one of the other things that I forgot to mention is smooth peanut butter is also a stool thickening food. So that could be a good option for a protein when you're trying to eat around the diarrhea, but trying to get a protein food in there. And then one of the other medications, which is sometimes used short-term or long-term, prednisone definitely has a lot of medical applications, but it does come with some nutrition-related side effects. So I did want to discuss that briefly. Sometimes prednisone can increase your appetite, make you feel hungry, even if maybe you've eaten your normal amount of food already. And so the recommendation there would be to lean into eating more protein and fiber containing foods. When you eat like complex or simple carbohydrates or simple sugars, that tends to kind of set you in a vicious cycle where it makes you actually more hungry and crave more sugar. So the protein and the fiber can really help you feel more satisfied longer and combat that increased hunger. Very related, prednisone can elevate your blood sugars. So eating combination meals like we've been talking about with the My Plate model of some protein with some carbohydrate and some fiber is really going to give you a better outcome, manage your hunger, manage your blood sugars better. And trying to limit the simple carbohydrates while you're on prednisone can really be helpful for these things as well. And then lastly, I did want to touch on when you're on prednisone long term, that can increase your risk of osteoporosis, which is weakening of the bone structure. So having calcium and potentially vitamin D supplement can be really helpful for trying to, make sure that you have the minerals you need for strong bones. Calcium is primarily found in dairy and non-dairy products, but it's also found in leafy greens and other foods. Whereas vitamin D is not very prevalent in the food system. We get it mostly from sunlight exposure. And if you live near where I do in the Midwest, we don't get a lot of sunlight exposure year round. So if you haven't had your 25 HD level checked, which is what they check for a vitamin D level, you might consider getting that checked to see if you might benefit from a vitamin D supplement. And next, we're going to talk about reflux disease that's highly associated with lung disease. So here are some tips to try to help you not only feel better, but manage the reflux that you might be experiencing. The first one is to avoid tight waistbands. That can really kind of squeeze things there so that it, pushes things upward, as well as being active is tolerated, because that can help the food move downward and through your system as opposed to up. The next one very similarly gets to the effect of gravity. After you've eaten, you want to stay upright for at least 2, if not 3 hours, because once you lay down, then that can increase how much of that food that you've eaten may reflux up into your esophagus. When you're sleeping, they might recommend that you elevate the head of your bed 6 to 9 inches so that you can have gravity working for you overnight. Eating smaller, frequent meals and snacks, it's kind of a recurring theme here today, can help you manage your reflux as well, because that smaller amount of food, can move out of your system and into your intestines and not be sitting in your stomach, so that it's less likely to reflux up. Another good tip is when you're eating to try to have it be a calm environment. Sit, take your time, chew your food well. Chewing is when the digestive process starts. So if you can get a head start then everything else can go more smoothly after that. And then there are some foods and beverages that you can try limiting or eliminating to see if that helps with your reflux. And some of these might look similar to some of the other slides that we were told might make like nausea and diarrhea worse. So you can try to limit or eliminate alcohol, caffeine. Peppermint and spearmint actually loosens that juncture at the bottom of your esophagus, making it easier for the acid to wash up. So avoiding peppermint or spearmint. Chocolate, pepper, high fat or fried foods, because those again sit in your stomach longer, and the longer food sits there, the more likely it is to wash back up. And certain fruits and vegetables, on an individual basis, I've heard do seem to make symptoms worse. So if any of these do tend to bother you, you can certainly try taking them out of your diet to see if that helps, such as tomatoes, citrus, garlic, and onions. Good nutrition can also help you eat the right amount of calories so you can achieve and maintain a healthy weight. Being in a good weight range can definitely improve your quality of life. When you're overweight, it can make breathing more difficult and increase oxygen needs. I've had a lot of patients that I've worked with, and as we've worked on weight loss, they've told me that it definitely helped their breathing, as well as their walking and their daily function in their home. One of the things that I really like to talk about with patients is mindful eating, and that's being aware of how the food you're eating is feeling in your body. So it's definitely a skill that takes time to practice, but as you get better at it, it gets easier to do. It's about eating with your internal cues, meaning that you eat when you're hungry and you stop when you're satisfied. And that's before when you're full, because sometimes when you're too full, that can also make breathing more difficult and be very uncomfortable. So when you're eating with your internal cues, what you're really doing is aligning what you're eating with what your body needs. So it's not only supporting your health, but it also feels better to your body. Some other topics that we discuss would be things such as increasing your fruit and vegetable intake. And for the reasons that we've went over previously, fruits and vegetables take up a lot of volume in your stomach, so you feel full, but they don't contain very many calories, so you feel full on less calories, and they can help you stay satisfied longer. Similarly, drinking adequate water is really helpful. Not only is water important in the body, but sometimes when we're thirsty, our body perceives that as hunger, and it can cause us to eat a snack when we didn't necessarily need one. Being active as able can certainly help, and we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. And then trying to avoid empty calories. Empty calories meaning um, something that doesn't really contain a lot of nutrition or important nutrients, but it does contain calories. For example, pop. It's not really enhancing your health, but it is taking up a lot of maybe your calorie budget for that day. And then also paying attention to portions and food groups like we talked about with healthy plate model. On the other end of things, if you're underweight, that can really decrease your energy and stamina and also make you more prone to infections. So if you're having a hard time eating enough to maintain your weight, one of the things that we talk about is eating those smaller but more frequent meals and snacks. It can be a big task and, kind of an unpleasant or impossible one to eat a large meal sometimes. So if we eat smaller amounts, it can be a lot more approachable, and just knowing that we have to do it a little bit more often. So instead of eating, 2 or 3 big meals in the day, maybe we're eating 4 or 5, even 6 small meals spaced by every 3 hours or so during the day. And then at those small meals and snacks, we want to try to choose nutrient dense foods, meaning each bite we take provides a lot of really good nutrition. So I would compare it to taking a bite of peanut butter, which could be almost 100 calories, and a bite of raw carrot, which could be maybe 1 or 2 calories. So when that prime real estate and your stomach is limited, you really want to make every bite that you take count for the most nutrition possible. Some other nutrient dense foods include nuts, seeds, cheese, avocado, butters, and oils. Small amounts can really count for a lot. In addition, some people find it very helpful to drink oral supplement drinks such as Boost and Ensure. They provide a lot of nutrition in a compact, 8-ounce form. And sometimes people find it easier to drink their calories than eat them. So that's another option to consider as well. And then the other bullet point there is sometimes when we don't necessarily have those hunger cues triggering us to eat, we need to really try to put ourselves on a schedule and eat almost like our food is a medication. So, maybe every 3 hours, that's when we eat, whether we're hungry or not, because each of those meals and snacks is an opportunity to get some nutrition in our body. And when we miss one of them, we're missing out on something that could be nourishing us. Some other nutrition related considerations that I sometimes talk about with people that you might find helpful. Sometimes people have issues with fullness and bloating, which can make breathing more difficult. So you might want to consider limiting gaseous foods if this is a problem for you. Gaseous foods include beans, not green beans, but like baked beans, black beans, garbanzo beans, and then the cruciferous vegetables like cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, for some people, cucumbers, and then anything that has bubbles in it, like carbonated beverages and beer. Those are introducing air into your system, so they can definitely contribute to feeling bloated. Another thing that introduces air into your system could be drinking out of a straw or chewing gum. So if those are things that you do often, you could consider not doing them to see if that helps you feel better. Some people need to limit their sodium intake due to other chronic diseases such as heart disease or kidney disease or hypertension. as well as when we eat too much sodium, it can cause fluid retention for some people, which makes the heart and the lungs have to work harder to pump that volume around the body. So if you're looking to decrease the amount of sodium in your diet, you might want to try adding less salt when you're cooking and at the table. You can flavor your foods with herbs, spices, vinegars. There's lots of good ways to get flavor without salt. Um, the number one place that salt in our diet comes from, though, is processed foods and dining out. So, really trying to limit those processed foods, consume more whole foods, and cook more at home, because then you're in control of how much salt or what other things you're adding to your food. So, you really can make it taste the way that you like it and also the way that it'll promote your health. And then we also want to discuss that excess sugar. It often has little nutritional value. The calories can add up very quickly. So for one thing, if you're trying to lose weight, cutting out excess sugar is a good thing to consider doing, because it's not enhancing your health. And it could be adding a lot of calories to your diet, taking up a lot of your calorie budget for the day. As well as sugar digestion produces excess carbon monoxide in the bloodstream, which can increase fatigue. And then, as we talked about earlier, excess sugar can also exacerbate nausea and/or diarrhea. So now we're going to talk about some tips that can make eating healthy easier. You might want to consider preparing food ahead of time. Planning is always key to implementing any health goals. So maybe you have a day of the week or time of the day where you feel like you have better energy and more time. Maybe that's when you set aside time to prep your food or plan your meals, or even batch cook ahead of time so that you can put aside portions for later in the week when you don't have as much time or energy for cooking. You can accept help to shop or prepare if you're often too tired to cook. And I know some people also do like meal delivery services, because that can make it easier for them to get those good foods actually to their house and in their body. Similarly, if you keep ready to eat foods on hand or easy to prepare foods for those times when you don't have as much time or as much energy, then you know that you'll have something nourishing that you can grab quickly and eat. Aiming for 5 to 6 small meals or snacks per day if you fill up or tire quickly, as we've said, can be really helpful. Eating in a relaxed environment with friends and family can really make eating a more enjoyable experience as well. So doing that when possible as well. A lot of times we think about dinner as the traditional meal that's kind of your larger one for the day. But at the end of the day is often when I hear that people have less time and energy. So, consider making your larger meal earlier in the day if that's when you have more time and energy for eating and cooking. Try to include a favorite food at each meal. That can make it more enjoyable as well. Rest before eating if needed. Eat sitting up. This helps remove pressure on the lungs. If you use oxygen, use it while eating, because eating and digestion require energy and increased oxygen needs. And then eat slowly, take small bites, and chew well. That really helps the digestive process start earlier. And then I know that this was a presentation on nutrition, but I also wanted to touch on physical activity, because it's a topic that I do talk about a lot with patients. Good physical activity can help maintain lung function and overall functional status. So it's really something that contributes significantly to quality of life as well. Regular physical activity is important for overall health and fitness. It can help us control our body weight. It promotes a feeling of well-being, and it decreases stress and anxiety. So it really can give us an outlet. It reduces the risk of chronic diseases, helps manage our blood sugar. It contributes to stronger bones. Weight-bearing exercises do that, as well as it can improve sleep and enhance immunity. So these are definitely all things that we would want for ourselves and our family and friends. And I've definitely heard from patients that have had the opportunity to participate in pulmonary rehab that it's been very helpful. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I think there's great benefit. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions now.
Well, hi again, everyone, and welcome to the question and answer session for the nutrition and quality of life session. Emilie, thank you for that presentation. It was really excellent. I think it can be difficult speaking to pulmonary fibrosis patients about nutrition because there are like so many different situations and different needs, and you really did a fabulous job breaking it down. So thank you for that presentation. We have a number of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. The first one is related to BMI. First, a question, is BMI the ideal way to measure someone's, see if someone is at a good weight? And then related question, what BMI should someone be at? Can you say what BMI an IPF patient should be at or a pulmonary fibrosis patient should be at?
So that's a really complicated question, and I could probably spend an hour talking about BMI. So BMI is body mass index, and it's purely based upon your height and your weight. So it really doesn't take into account body composition at all, such as, how much of your body is fat mass versus lean mass versus bone. So it's not the best accurate way to kind of judge where your weight is going to be the healthiest for you. That being said, of course, I do work on the lung transplant side, and we do use BMI as some of the criteria for listing. So you don't want your BMI too low, honestly. You probably want it above 20, ideally. And for transplant listing, different centers have different cutoff levels. So it is something to be aware of, but somewhere in the 20s is usually a good place for BMI to be. And it's going to vary a little bit depending upon how much muscle mass you have. If you have more muscle mass, your BMI is going to appear higher than someone who has less, but maybe, what am I trying to say? Like, for example, I had a coworker once that did a lot of like weightlifting and bodybuilding, and his BMI was 30, which would technically put him into the obese category. But because he had so much muscle mass, that's why it seemed elevated, even though he was very healthy. So not the best judge, but usually somewhere in the 20s is a good place to aim, and really paying attention to where your body feels best. A lot of us have a feel for where we feel best. And so I wouldn't encourage anyone to purely aim for a specific weight just because their BMI would be exactly, this or that. But thinking about where you feel best and, what's a good range for you.
Great, thanks. Should pulmonary fibrosis patients be meeting with a nutritionist as part of their care plan? Is that something that, that most centers suggest?
So I think it's really kind of a case-by-case basis. If you're having a lot of issues with your nutrition that are impacting your health, it might be a good idea to ask if you can meet with a dietitian or seek one out yourself. If you're losing weight rapidly because you're not able to keep up with your nutrition, or you're having a lot of GI side effects that are making, your day-to-day really unpleasant, talking with a dietitian could help. Likewise, if, you've been told to lose weight would really help your breathing and help you feel better, then working with a dietitian can really be helpful for setting goals and coming up with things to work on together. So I don't know that everyone needs to, but there definitely are a lot of instances when meeting with a dietitian could be beneficial. I don't meet with all our patients. It's often on a case-by-case basis, whether the patient requested it or the provider is, saying this would be helpful to the patient.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. What about a patient who who is trying to eat fruits and vegetables, avoid fried foods, do sort of some of the things that you're talking about, but is continuing to have trouble with keeping, more weight that, presumably their doctor has said this still isn't, the ideal weight. Do you have any suggestions along those lines for sort of next steps for that person?
Yeah, so we all have different eating habits, and sometimes, I'll just in discussion with a patient kind of be, just talking through things, and maybe I'll get a recall or, talk to them a little bit, and we'll be able to identify, one or two or three things that they want to work on. So I think I mentioned some of them in the presentation. Sometimes it's eating out of boredom instead of hunger, and those aren't really calories that your body needed at that time. Sometimes it's skipping meals and then getting over hungry and overeating, let's say at dinner, and then feeling really full afterwards. And again, that was overshooting your, how much your body needed at that time. Sometimes activity is the avenue that we pursue to, build lean body mass as well as burn more calories. So it really does vary on the person. I think, just kind of trying to find a good eating routine that aligns with your hunger and your satiety, basing those meals in, a moderate amount of protein, fruits and vegetables, and, side dish portion of those carbohydrates. Limiting sugars and sweets, especially if you're on prednisone, really makes a big difference because, as I mentioned, that prednisone makes people feel hungry all the time, even when our body doesn't really need nutrition. And when you're able to take that sugar out of your system, it really removes that fuel from the hunger fire. So it's much easier to eat moderate amounts and eat, in sort of a normal meal spacing, as opposed to feeling hungry all the time and craving a lot of sugar.
Great, thanks. That all makes sense. Do you have any suggestions for meal delivery services or the sort of the prepared meals that you get to cook on your own? Are there any ones that you suggest, or are they things that we need to stay away from? Any suggestions for maybe using that for someone who wants to do some prepared meals, but again, with the fatigue or with that whatever reason, could use a little bit of help?
Yeah, I think that that's becoming a really big thing nowadays is meal delivery systems, and I'm familiar with some of them, not all of them, unfortunately. So I wish I could give a better answer to this. For some people, Meals on Wheels is a really good option just because it's readily available in most communities. It's low cost. I've also heard that Mom's Meals are quite good, and you can get like a low sodium version if that's something that you're supposed to be doing for your health. Other options, like thinking HelloFresh and what's the other? There's a lot of them out there, honestly, right now. But some of them more come like, here's your recipe and here's your ingredients that are prepped and portioned and ready to go, and you cook it yourself. So it's going to take a little more effort, but some people might find it tastier or want to be involved in the food preparation process. So I guess thinking about, what is your cost constraint for your meals, what's available in your area, and how much of the actual preparation do you want to be doing, can kind of narrow your options down into what might be available to someone.
Great, thank you. Do you have any other suggestions of soluble fibers that people can eat? You had suggested, I think you had given the example of like the inside of the apple was an example that you had given. Any other soluble fiber suggestions?
Yeah, so soluble fiber is definitely highest in fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. Some of those can be a little harder to digest in their like whole form or their raw form. So definitely cooked ones. Something like flax seeds, should be ground and maybe soaked so that the soluble fiber can start absorbing the water before you consume it. Similarly to like chia seeds, those need to be soaked sort of ahead of time before you consume them to really get the full benefit of that. Things like barley, lentil soup, or split pea soup, those can be good kind of thickening meals that way with soluble fiber too. Sweet potatoes, I think, as well. I don't know if I mentioned that in the presentation, but sweet potatoes, because sweet potatoes are good.
Great. Some of those, the split pea soup or something sounds really good right now. I don't know, or at least in our part of the country, it's getting pretty cold, and I imagine in Michigan it's getting pretty cold too. So that sounds nice right now. What about, can you speak a little bit more about transplant patients? Are there any foods that transplant patients need to avoid, or any restrictions for people who've had a transplant?
Yeah, there aren't really food restrictions before transplant. A lot of times we're just talking about really optimizing our nutritional and physical status so that we can have the best outcome from a large surgery such as that. So, trying to attain and maintain a healthy weight, being active, getting our blood sugar under control if it's not already, optimizing our vitamin D status for our bone health. Those are things that usually we're talking about before transplant. After transplant, there are a few fruits that have medication interactions with the immunosuppressant medications. So people lifelong are told to avoid things like grapefruit, pomegranate, papaya, starfruit, blood oranges, and to follow really good food safety, because once you're immunosuppressed, you could get sick from eating unsafe foods. You want to really make sure to minimize that risk.
Great, thank you. And what about, sorry, going back to the soluble fiber, someone had asked about soluble fiber supplements. Is that something that you ever suggest people talk to their doctors about, or is that not something you really bring up very often?
Yeah, with many things, I feel like food is often the best source of those things we're trying to get in our body. So I often talk to people first about just trying to get it through food. Fiber supplements sometimes can go one way or another. Sometimes they can make things worse. If you're not accustomed to taking them, you might get really gassy and bloated afterwards, might worsen diarrhea, or, the opposite, make you constipated. So food first would be my suggestion. When I'm working with patients on tube feedings, a lot of times we'll use the soluble fiber because we don't have the option to, change our food choices quite as much. And it certainly can be a choice, and different fiber supplements are more soluble versus a combination of soluble and insoluble. So, that is something that could be considered, but I would go with food first if possible.
Another question for someone who, again, is trying to get some snacks in. Do you have any good snack ideas, good healthy ones, whether they're, trying to eat multiple meals or trying to just make sure that, their snacks are on the healthier side? Do you have any good snack, sort of fun snack suggestions maybe?
Yeah, it definitely depends on your goals. If you're trying to gain weight or lose weight or maintain. If you're trying to lose weight, you want something that's going to hold you at least 3 hours before you get hungry again. And I usually recommend an ounce of protein with a serving of a fruit or vegetable or a whole grain. So that could be something like celery and peanut butter, or cheese stick and an apple. If you're trying to gain weight, though, you want to pick something that's much more nutrient rich, so that a small amount can really add more calories. So that might be like peanut butter and crackers or cheese and crackers, so kind of substituting the cracker for the fruit or vegetable, which again is higher volume, higher fiber, lower calorie. So it kind of, that protein though is really important at your snacks because it will hold you. If you just eat celery or just eat an apple, you might get hungry again in like half an hour or an hour. And then you get into a grazing pattern, which isn't helpful. You really want to eat your meal or eat your snack, feel satisfied, and then have a gap of time when you don't feel hungry and you're not necessarily thinking about food. And that gap will vary depending on the person, but it should be, at least 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4 or 5. Yeah.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you. Can smoothies be a good way to incorporate protein and/or fruits and vegetables into a diet?
Definitely. Smoothies can definitely do that. You can hide all sorts of things in there. some people definitely prefer drinking their nutrition or starting their day that way with like a liquid. Smoothies for a protein source, you could do like Greek yogurt. If you're trying to go more like lactose free, then maybe a protein powder, or you do like a banana peanut butter smoothie or something like that. And again, just depending on your weight goals, thinking about how many calories are in that, because we're not always as aware of the calories when they're in liquid form. That's why things like Ensure and Boost are liquid, because we can get more calories in without really feeling like we've eaten a whole bunch. So if you're trying to do a lower calorie smoothie versus a higher calorie smoothie, it's just something to be thinking about when you're coming up with your mixes.
So if you're a vegetarian, how do you know that you're getting enough protein and enough vitamins that you need?
That's a really good question. You can certainly, do like a food tracking app where you put in a few days and it'll tell you how many grams of protein you're getting. Most people are going to need at least 50 grams of protein, 60 grams of protein. It really kind of depends upon your height and other factors, but you can definitely get a feel for how you're doing with your protein if you calculate it out. It's not hard to get enough protein on a vegetarian diet, but sometimes it does take a little bit more thought. The B vitamins, similarly, that could be calculated on a tracking app. You could have some lab work done if you really were concerned that you were running low, checking your B12, for example. Or, you could just take a B vitamin if you're really concerned, and it's water soluble. So if you get more than you really need, you're just going to pee out the extra. And of course, if you're ever going to start a supplement, consult with your provider first, because there are, potential medication interactions.
Right. Great. Well, again, this is such good information. Thank you so much, Emilie. I've learned a lot through this talk, so we really appreciate you being here. And thank you again, everyone, for attending our session today. We will be sending out a survey on Monday about the PFF Summit, your experience here. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We use the results from this survey to inform our next meetings and summits. So please, if you get the opportunity, do fill out the survey today. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us.